So before we get to the good stuff, I have to give a shout out to our sponsors. We could not pull this off without them. So a thank you to Pantheon. They are this month's webinar sponsor. Pantheon provides the fastest Drupal performance in the industry, powerful web developer tools, automated workflows, and enterprise-grade security. So if you're ready to level up your Drupal development, go to their website and open an account today. So most of you all may know who we are. We are Drupal for Gov. We are interested in Drupal and all things open source. So in addition to this monthly webinar that we give, we also have our yearly Drupal GovCon conference. We're in the beginning planning session mode. So we're figuring out how we do this post-pandemic. We also do global training days, half-day training, and we help run the Gov Summit at DrupalCon North America, which we'll also be doing that this year. So if you go to DrupalCon this year, check us out. If you are interested in contacting us, please feel free to email us at Drupal for Gov, and we also are available on Slack as well as Twitter. So if you miss a session, we upload all of our sessions to YouTube, and in addition, you can also get a list of all the previous webinars on our drupalforgov.us/webinars page. And so today's speaker, Mike Madison, he is a senior strategist. He brings over 15 years of experience advising, managing, and leading digital communications, content strategy, and technical development projects for nonprofit, foundations, government, and advocacy clients. And then we also have John Faber, who's a managing director, Chapter 3, and he's involved in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's been involved in the San Francisco Bay Area internet industry since 1991. And ran a local ISP during the .com era. It's like a year after I graduated from high school. And he's been working in the Drupal community for over 12 years as a developer, architect, and sales consultant. So thank you first and welcome.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for that introduction. Dates me a little bit, but that's okay. I've been in the business for a long time. Thank you for inviting Chapter 3 and Mike and myself to talk about our project that we have been working on with the Judicial Council of California. So I'm going to let Mike fire up our slides, and Mike, why don't you just go ahead and get that presentation rolling?
Good, thanks. I'll bring it up right now.
Perfect.
And let me just go into present mode.
And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section and we'll do a good job at addressing them.
Okay, and up is the agenda. We've obviously already started with our brief introductions, and thanks so much, Nika, for your kindness and thoughtfulness in guiding the presentation today and serving as our host. We are, as John mentioned, Chapter 3. We've been in the business, oh goodness, for well over a dozen years now, since actually 2006, if memory serves me correctly. Right. And we have extensive experience working with government clients as well as enterprise and other nonprofits. And as you all know, I don't have to tell any of you, the government sector can be both incredibly gratifying in terms of the level of impact that your work can have. It also can be exceptionally challenging because of the nature of a large organization or an enterprise government organization with a lot of stakeholders and a lot of complexity behind it. So our talk today is both, giving you some idea of what we discovered during the course of this project, this work with the Judicial Council of California, the genesis of the project, how it came about, which John will speak to some of that shortly. And so while there are certainly technical lessons learned, there's a lot of human factors and organizational factors that are part of the background that we bring to this project and that we think would be particularly useful for those on the call. So we'll get into a little bit on project background, on the motivation for the project, or like I said, our lessons learned on tech and human factors, and then have a Q&A for 15 minutes or however long we have, or if there's interest in talking about the project or anything else that we're up to. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to John and talk a little bit about the background of the client and the background of the genesis of the project. John?
Thanks for that, Mike. So Chapter 3 started working with Judicial Council, I believe, about, we're going on our 3rd year of working with them. But the genesis of this project was actually a great deal longer, in the sense that, the court system in California, which is the largest court system in the United States, had been relying on old technology that was sort of stuck due to California budgetary concerns, right? So I had been working with Judicial Council for years, trying to encourage them to update their websites. They had gotten their websites into a state of, like, basically none of the sites were mobile. They were not accessible. It was just a big, huge mess. And it ran on a CMS called Red Dot, which added to some complexities. They had spurred off and done some bespoke sites using Drupal. So overall, there was a whole bunch of different things going on. But it took a very long time for us to sort of begin to be able to find the funding for this. And I think that everybody in the government community knows that sometimes getting funding or getting that type of budgetary approval can be challenging. But California changed. They gave the Judicial Council funding. And so they put an RFP out, and Chapter 3 responded to it, and we were the selected vendor. So, essentially, our job has been to assist with getting their sites off of Red Dot, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But alongside of that, there's a full redesign that's going on with that, and a bunch of technology decisions. I think we're doing 58 different sites that are all hooked together with a pattern lab. But that's sort of the genesis of the project. I think that we've learned a great deal about a lot of different things in this project. But I will say that sort of getting to the point of actually working on it was a fair amount of work, right? So the whole RFP process and getting the vendor established and things like that. So the major goals of what we're trying to do here is Red Dot was a commercial piece of software, so they wanted to deprecate that, so they did not have to pay licensing fees going forward. They wanted to reduce, that was basically a cost reduction method. And so they had done a fair amount of analysis on which way they wanted to go, and they selected Drupal as their platform. I attribute that to my encouragement over the years that they use Drupal as their universal platform. But I cannot take credit for that. The Judicial Council did a great deal of work understanding all different platforms and did eventually decide on Drupal. Like I said, the old Red Dot sites were non-mobile, and they were also in a very rigid template that had become polluted with content and just not very constituent friendly. So another goal of this project was to, sort of do a design realignment, and we used some technology to give them some flexibility in that design realignment by encouraging the use of a pattern lab system that gave them sort of this granular control over design elements across the ecosystem of websites. And, basically we were just improving the whole platform. And so I think that's sort of the genesis of the project. It finally got funded. It took years and years and years. And the way that the funding came through was a little bit interesting too, because it was like a technology funding RFP, right? So there was no mention of strategy and things like that within the RFP. And these are some of the things that we'll discuss. And I think that's a discussion point in how projects in government get funded and like what processes they go through. So this one was primarily a technology funding, a lift and shift. We need to get off Red Dot. And then sort of as a sub note underneath there, they were like, and we'd like to do some redesign work, create some branding stuff, and basically improve the look and feel of the California court website system. So, Mike, that's the genesis of this project, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about some interesting lessons that we learned. I will admit, I've been at Chapter 3 for a long time. Chapter 3 has been around for 17 years. I've been at Chapter 3 for 11 years. And this project is one of the largest municipal projects that we've done, right? So, dealing with the court system, which is essentially a federated group of individuals that all work together for a common cause, but are fiercely independent at the same time, was interesting for an agency like Chapter 3 to go in and begin to work with. And so these are some of the lessons that we kind of learned during this process. And I'll let Mike talk about these.
Thank you, John. And I know that there may be some corollaries to some other projects that we had, like at sf.gov, and a few others that I think would be useful on background once we discuss a little bit more on that. So with that, we want to make this as conversational as possible. So please, if you have questions, although I know typically they're saved to the end, we also will look and see if we can answer some questions as we're going in as well. But these are fairly straightforward, but really important lessons to kind of always keep in mind. And for us, when we were thinking about both the work we've done with San Francisco City and County and other large organizations, things that you want to keep sort of repeating. One, and John mentioned this, that the project, the funding of the project really emerged from a technology sort of RFP on the idea of what we call the lift and shift, which is literally, don't worry so much about restructuring content, doing inventories, doing anything strategic on the front end to kind of decide what the look and content and interaction of the site should be. Instead, we have kind of an urgent need as an organization to get off of an old licensed technology. And additionally to that, make sure that we have a shared infrastructure that we're trying to incentivize the courts to come onto. So because of that, there wasn't a strong lead on the project with content and website strategy. It was more about, let's design enough components to make sure that we can start to plot in the existing content and the existing pages on this new infrastructure. And so some of the background here is that there was initially a different design partner who designed that first kind of pattern library, design system, component system, atoms and molecules, whatever you want to call it. So it was component design first rather than sort of content strategy. But that was very much driven because there was a timeline that they wanted to get as many ports as possible off of Red Dot or off of old installations of Drupal. And so, that comes with, on the one hand, the benefit of being able to move sites quickly off because you're not doing a lot of strategy up front. You're really just thinking, okay, do we have enough components and infrastructure to move content over? Yes, great, let's start moving sites over. On the other hand, a lot of that content may be fairly outdated. There may be new things that the courts would want to do that they're not going to be able to for this kind of lift and shift phase. And it can lead to some, you know, I don't know if compromise is the right word, but some gaps between the components that you have in the design system and the content that you're trying to bring over and restructure. So from our perspective, you know, in an ideal world, we would lead with content and web strategy, not with designed components that we were going to have to shoehorn some content in. For the most part, and I think we've been pretty successful, and the courts have been really happy, which is sort of our measure of success. A lot of these courts were on very dated designs. We certainly are happy to share some additional background on those that were in both the Red Dot and Drupal installation that were very difficult to work with. They were not mobile friendly, so they were not responsive. So from the perspective of like low-hanging fruit of getting them to a polished, clean design that has lots of space and is modern looking, and at least from the front end perspective, a much more sort of attractive and engaging outreach to the audience, you know, mission accomplished. The back end and some of the content authoring and getting that content in and figured out that, you know, took a little bit more time, and some of it was a little bit of learn by doing. Part of that is you have, John mentioned that there could be up to 58. Well, there could be up to even more than that. This is an incentivized project. So because of the structure of the organization, and this gets to the structure and culture lesson learned, because of the structure of the organization, each of those 58 superior courts can do whatever they want with their technology investment. Either they can sign on to this project, and the incentives for that is, you know, shared maintenance, the code base is maintained, the hosting is taken care of by the single sort of package through Pantheon, and other incentives of just like the initial move of the content over to the new site is being managed by the JCC centralized web services team and us as a vendor, and then a few other consultants who are also helping with some of the project work. So there's a lot of incentive, but there's no requirement that the courts kind of sign on to this. So part of the motivation of showing courts moving fast from the old technology to the new platform is because that was the intent is to sell other courts on, this is a good project, it's going to result in an effective design and maintenance solution for the individual courts, many of which are relatively small. You have, you know, counties in California with, you know, just tens of thousands of residents, and then counties like LA, San Francisco, and others where, you know, hundreds of thousands or in the millions. So you can imagine that a federated court system where each of the courts has a lot of independence, though they all are managed centrally in terms of legal procedures and processes by the Judicial Council, that you know, it's a lot of carrot and less stick in terms of getting them to sign on. John, I don't know if you want to.
I think we found the same thing with the city of San Francisco too. Is that it was an encouragement to move to a new platform as opposed to you are moving to a new platform, which is a you know, a great approach. And I think Chapter 3 has done a great job of making courts happy with their new layouts. But I think and so that was a huge lesson learned on our part and a huge success. I think that perhaps not an unintended consequence, but a consequence of that is that maybe courts who were not necessarily focusing on their websites, except for maybe like the jury, you know, planning thing or the pay your citation box, they just had not really paid attention to their websites that deeply. And when we did get them to move onto a new platform and they had a new design and things were looking wonderful, there was a lot of like, oh, we want to improve this, we want to do that, we want to do this, which, you know, created another layer of, wow, now there's all these people with these sort of custom requirements, right? And they're small, but they're custom. But the point of the platform that we are encouraging the council to build, we have to think about these features and things that new courts want. And so that did add a little layer of complexity in the sense that they're federated and they're like, we can have whatever we want. And we're kind of telling them, well, you know, our platform. And so we're still working through those issues right now, because remember, the first thing we did was lift and shift, and we're still doing a bunch of that. But that made the courts sort of look at their websites in a way that they had not before, which was a great consequence, but one that created some new lessons for us to sort of get through, which is like, how do we manage like a flow of bespoke features and try to roll them into, as best as we can, a universal feature? Because this goes into the architecture on what we built for them in terms of the back-end maintenance of these sites. You know, it is an installation profile based system, right? And so when changes are made either to Pattern Lab or to modules or to features, the notion is to push it across to the whole platform so that web services doesn't have, you know, basically a bespoke group of websites, right? So this lesson that we're learning here is that that's challenging. Like, how do we do that? And this is sort of like the next phase of our project is that we're working through these things to say, what are universal features for a platform as large as the Judicial Council?
Yeah, and John, that's a great point, because we're doing that somewhat in tandem now. The project has progressed to the point we now have, I think, about 24 of the superior courts, the county superior courts that are live on the new platform. So to be able to move, and those are both, you know, very small county courts as well as some medium and larger size courts. But to be able to move that many, and with the complexity of, you know, you have to introduce the project to the owners at the court level, you know, whether it's your CIO, your webmaster, a few content folks, and other program folks. In some cases, those teams are very small. In some cases, they're a bit more well-resourced. To be able to do that, I think, was a great accomplishment that they're really happy with. But now, like as John was saying, we're at that stage where, like, oh, you know, there's this one thing that we would really like to have. And then we, you know, have to devise a process where there's a rational way to integrate that, right? Because resources aren't unlimited. You know, to some extent, you're giving up some of the ability to have a very bespoke custom website, but you're gaining the security of the, you know, shared resources, hosting is included, and code maintenance is maintained kind of centrally, as well as the design and pattern library. So, but we know in order to get some of the bigger courts on board, and you know, as many of the remaining 58 courts as possible, there needs to be a comfort level with our commitment to expanding the platform. And for us right now, you know, we're crafting a process where, you know, we have a backlog. We meet with them constantly. We have structured weekly meetings as well as sort of ad hoc meetings as needed. And there's now a CIO group within the courts that will be part of that kind of review process about, you know, determining which features, especially major features, or things that we really want to get into the system, and when and how much effort to put around them. This will become more of an issue as we move into you know, deploying the Supreme Court website, the courts of appeal, the integrations with document management systems that are especially part of those courts, the higher level courts, because they work a lot with opinions and issuing opinions and document management. So
to sort of recap what Mike is saying here, I think a lesson learned for if there's any agencies on board here, the lesson learned is like, listen, you have to be flexible in these types of environments, right? Because the government and Judicial Council, just from our experience, they do work in a different way than a private sector services-based organization like Chapter 3. So I would say Be really prepared to pivot, right? And then also this line about maintaining flexibility and staffing the project is super important, and it was a lesson learned at chapter 3. A lot of times when I sign an enterprise class client, they come in and they just are very intense from beginning, middle, and end of the project because they're driving to get something done. In this project, we kind of learned that these organizations need time to digest and to ebb and flow on their decision-making process. So as a vendor, you kind of have to be, willing to maintain, a lot of flexibility. Like, yeah, we'll throw on 3 guys this week and for 3 weeks or 2, So anyway, that part of it, we did notice some other vendors having a little bit of a challenge with that, right? Like, so sometimes they just didn't have that flexibility within their schedule. They worked it out. But at chapter 3, our project managers are amazing. And so they maintained that flexibility, which gave the Judicial Council the ability to think about the solutions that we were bringing up, right? And then the other one is understand the structure and culture of the organization is a piece that I want to touch on, because a major lesson learned at chapter 3 is that this has turned into, when we touched on it a minute ago, where we're like, we have to sell these ideas to these individual courts, right? And so there's like a lot of personality management going on, and like desire management, and the vendor is directly involved with that, right? So it's like, it's super interesting to be at that level, but it does, I have noticed that there's a lot of project management. My project manager is in there constantly. I call them therapy sessions, because they literally will go through, an hour-long or hour-and-a-half long meeting to talk about things that just result in the client team feeling good. They're like, oh, we feel good about, all right, cool, we feel good about this, right? But I'm like, it did take that, right? And that's the commitment as a vendor that you need to be willing to make, which is understanding that some of these clients really, they need help, and they need to understand, and they need somebody to sit down with them. And that's where like super effective, flexible, amazing, excellent project management comes in place. And so any vendors on board, I would say put your best project managers on these things, because sometimes they can be an act of keeping the plates, 20 plates spinning at the same time.
Thank you, John. And let me move over to the other lessons learned in design and development, because you touched on some of these as well. And so I'm not going to go necessarily in order. Just one of the things that really strikes me is, this last point about designers and developers to collaborate early during the design phase, and get feedback, especially where there are some specific requirements around web accessibility standards and keeping to USWDS, which is the baseline that the Judicial Council wants to be able to stick to. They're, one of the strategic goals, and again, turning from strategy into actual development, is make the content as accessible as possible. Accessible in the sense of like, the language that's used on the page should be, human language as best as possible. Obviously, legal websites require some very specific language at times, but there's also ways of describing interactions with the court that could be sort of more human friendly. And a lot of that has, to date, has really been on what's called the new self-help portal, which was one of the early parts of this project, where the state of California is building the biggest online self-help portal to help citizens with, like, if you want to do a name change, if you have a small claim, if you have representation for a case that you need to like submit papers and documents for, making sure that that kind of information is really accessible from just the content perspective, but also from this perspective of USWDS and how links work and spacing around elements and design and everything else. And so making sure that there is, a designer checking in with a developer and saying, I'm, putting this out, what do you think? Does it align with what we're trying to do? Does it break USWDS in any way in terms of contrast or anything else, or how we're building it? Those kind of collaborations, I think, early on, which, maybe they happen often where you are, but I would certainly emphasize that as one of the points. And especially in a big project where there is likely other partners, design partners or other vendors, make sure that you can press for collaboration with them as early and often as possible. There are some times where when you have a tripartite or a bigger relationship where you've got the client, one vendor, and another vendor, sometimes the client likes to just do one-to-ones and then sort of bring you together occasionally. I find it much more helpful if there is, a willingness to share some more information, feel comfortable about, you're in a space where maybe there's some competition, maybe there isn't, but ultimately that kind of collaboration, I think, lifts everybody up. When putting together the design system and the prototypes as much as possible, once again, look for real content examples. I think you can save yourself some issues later on by not using as much lorem ipsum and actually going to real content, see how it's structured. Oh, there's a content which is just really long and hasn't been broken up. Maybe we need to invest a little time in actually taking that content, putting in headings, restructuring it a bit, and implementing that within the new components on the new site. And then this bit about the design ecosystem and its hierarchy. What I mean there is you have, on the one hand, code deployment that you want to deploy across all these installation profiles. At the same time, very differently from that, is you have the motivation from the individual court owners that their particular court site or a group of sites should have a look and feel that they feel very comfortable and very proud of. So when you have this pattern library that says, this is reliably how a heading looks and how a brow looks and how image shading happens and what happens on click, all those things, getting them as uniform as possible is certainly a big goal for a design system and a pattern library, but providing a road for groups of courts or groups of sites to also have their individual look and feel represented in a way where they can feel comfortable about the design and happy with the fact that there's a shared code base. That's something that you need to think about. And so in what the real example here is, there's the Supreme Court, there's going to be the courts of appeal. They will have a different design system that governs their look and feel. So they will, although they'll operate with a similar code base, they will have a design system that will give them more of a customized look and a different kind of more professional feel than the trial courts, which are considered the sort of public, I need to pay a parking ticket, I need to sign up for my child custody hearing, I need to do other in-person things with the court. So that the design system that governs that is a little bit different. John, I don't know if you want to add something here. We also have some questions, I think.
Yeah, I threw some links in the chat so you can see a little bit about what we're talking about. So I got the self-help site up there, which is a super interesting site built primarily with web form workflows, which is super interesting and cool. And one of the things that's interesting again about this site is it went in with a ton of ambition and a ton of technology, and then the content really was the part that began to, as with most projects, we have found that content is complicated. And I think that's a huge takeaway, especially in the Judicial Council project and all of these projects. Content is super duper complicated. And when you're thinking about your content after you have built your site and you didn't, the content wasn't necessarily fully reviewed prior to site construction, you run it, things happen, right? And not only that, but making content takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of resources, and a lot of these organizations can be resource constrained. And so that's a reality of these projects. They're massive content projects. And what Mike was talking about on these court sites, Mike, if you want to just click on the Superior Court link that I stuck in chat, that'll show you what the old design looked like. And this is what happens to a website when there is no content. It just content strategy. It's just post it, Dano. You know what I mean? Like they posted it.
Yeah.
It's in the Zoom chat.
You want the SF Superior Court?
Yeah, because that's an old design, right? Yep. And so not a constituent first design by any stretch of the imagination. And it's not mobile, okay? And there's so much content on this site that my eyes just boggle when I look at it, right? But again, this is what happens over time. You know, no one's thinking about the constituent that's got to come here and find something on this website. They're really using an inside-out methodology to produce their websites as opposed to an outside-in methodology. And the difference between the two is outside-in means you're the customer interacting with your content. Do you like this? Is this great? Inside-out means I'm just putting all my content on my website and I hope my customers interact with it. And that has been a strategy on the web for a long time because SEO was all about content and no. So anyway, now if you click on one of these newer sites, you will see the intent of what's going on, like Madeira or Tulare. The intent, now these are still in semi-lift and shift stages here, right? But you can see much larger, easier to read, a little bit more service-based, right? So that's something that we learned is constituents want government sites to be about services and not content. And this has been a challenge, again, a content play, right? A huge content play. But our template does put services up front and center. Pay a ticket, get jury selection. Whether the payment portal or jury selection thing is a different system on every single website, the intent of these things is to give constituents a more service first orientation to judicial and court services, right? We're not there, not 100% there. But I'll tell you, the difference between the Superior Court of San Francisco, which we're working on, it's going to go into a template that looks like this, and this is large, right? For the constituent, for the guy who's never been to court before, this one looks scary. Like I'm scared. I'm done. I'm finished. This one, that's the Madeira one.
There's a lot of links. Like on these old court sites, what's happened is over time they've just said, I don't know where I'm going to put this, so I'm just going to put this in the sidebar in the link, and otherwise people are going to get lost, and they certainly are going to get lost regardless of where they are.
10-year content layer cake that a lot of government websites are dealing with, a lot. And so a lesson learned inside this one was, I think a reduction of content and a service-first orientation to your design is what constituents are looking for. They don't want to read. They don't want to go through all this stuff. It's not necessary. We're not entirely there yet, but I think a goal vision would be that a lot of this stuff is not really up there. It's about like, I got to go to court, I got to file, I got to pay, I got to do this, and not much else, right? And we're getting there. And if you look at if you look at like sf.gov, they have that's a project that we've been working on for many years, and they have reduced the website down into an extremely plain website. And it took a while for me to grasp that the intent of the digital services team inside the city of San Francisco was to build mobile first. So if you scrunch the screen up, you'll see that it really looks a lot better as a mobile site than it does as a desktop site. And that essentially the whole notion of this site is service first, nothing else. Are they there? No. But they're getting there, and that is sort of percolating through. So again, good lesson learned for agencies that are on board or for people who are working in complex government website systems. It's like, I think that government websites should move towards a service first methodology, and then deep, dark, dense content in the archives. So yeah, that's my comment on that. And we're running up on like 12:40 here. Do we have, maybe we should go, do you have another slide that we should go over? Or are we
I do, and it's the Q&A slide. So I think it's a good time to stop here on our lecture and to open it up. And we also have some examples from, again, the courts.ca infrastructure, which was one of the goals that we talked about, or was on the slide earlier, just sort of disentangling a very large ecosystem and giving them both their own home, but also a shared infrastructure. So why don't we turn it over to Q&A. And Nika, I don't know if you have any questions that were either sent to you directly via chat or separately.
No, I just see one bravo.
Oh, we'll take a bravo.
Can you talk about the content creation process, e.g., highly flexible versus content types? So that is a great question, and the template that we built for the court system does use a paragraph-based layout system, right? So we've given them what we call the flexible template system, and that allows content editors to have variety in content page creation that all lives and does not stray from the design and pattern lab system. So what that does is, if you look at some of the sites that we showed, like Tulare is slightly different than this other guy, and we did that primarily because it's such a federated system you know, we needed to try to please everybody. Like, you know, you can't please everybody all the time. You can please some of the people some of the time. So we're like, we are in that situation. Yeah,
and John, I'm just flashing back and forth between two examples of two trial courts, obviously within the same family. You know, this might be relatively minor, but you know, this gives this flexibility of going landscape in the case where you have your better images are bigger images of the area, because that's the idea here, is that this template is the sort of environmental or area template, regional template, and then this one is of a specific courthouse, right? And that's to tailor to the individual courthouses, you know, their own perception of themselves, also their digital assets. Maybe they don't have great images of their court site. Maybe the court site is under construction. Even small things like that allows some variation in the look and feel, and to match the kind of content and digital assets that they have.
Yeah. Let me see, I got another question here. It says, what was your migration strategy for lift and shift? And what was our migration strategy for that? Well, I mean, you know, quite honestly, these courts were not complicated content type based websites to start with. And so it was not that difficult to break up their content into logical content types and just basically migrate it into the design. And then it goes into a manual review process of fixing, adjusting, and manipulating the content. So what we would do is we would get the court ready for a content migration, which means please don't add any more content to your website. Then they would, you know, we have several of the engineers at Chapter 3 are content migration experts, been doing it for years. So we wrote a content migration script from Red Dot. And then they also had some like Drupal 7 sites lying around. But the content migration script from Red Dot did several things, because most of that content lived inside the body field encapsulated in HTML, right? So like a lot of, you know, everyone on this call is familiar with that. We moved this to more of a component-based architecture as best as possible for their content in the initial run of our migration. Was it perfect? No. It needed manual cleanup. So there were 3 people on the JCC staff that would go through these websites as soon as they were launched and start to clean up obvious errors. And then there's a process to go to the court, and then it goes live. So that was sort of the migration thing. And then this question actually relates to this, which is, sorry if I missed this, but are these all running a single instance of Drupal, or is it a multi-site? And so that's sort of the magic that we created for the Judicial Council, in the sense that right now the system is running as a multi-site inside a Git repo, but it gets exported out as individual sites to Pantheon, because Pantheon doesn't support multi-site right now. people on the call, their ears are probably exploding, saying, why would you do that? That seems crazy. The reason why we did that was because the Judicial Council has plans to move, and they want to move into a multi-site architecture under their own corporate Azure account, right? And so we needed to maintain the ability for us to do that. And so it's kind of like a multi-site, but it's right now it is all individual sites on Pantheon, but the deployment process comes out of a single code base. So all of our maintenance and stuff is done in a single code base and then deployed out to Pantheon. Efficient little solution for now. I think that over the long term for organizations that have multi-site structures, the multi-site way of doing things is a good way of doing things, there's no doubt, but I think that there are new ways of doing things coming on the horizon. But again, to answer your specific question, it's kind of like a multi-site, but it's a multi-site that makes individual sites for now and could be redeployed onto any hosting provider as either individual sites or as a multi-site stack.
John, I wanted to add just something on to the migration question that was just asked. One note about that is that when the process of sort of initially socializing, so talking to the individual court, a court says, you know, I'm interested in getting on the platform, but I need more information. So there is a kickoff call with the JCC, the Central Web Services team. They explain the process, they explain sort of timing and requirements. They do actually, one edit to the earlier comment is they actually do allow courts to continue to add content to the site. But what they do is they keep a log, basically a change log, so that they know that there's going to be, you know, for a time you're going to enter it into the new site as well as entering it onto the existing site. So the web services team is really being a web services team. Like that's one of their incentives is yes, obviously you can't have your site without any new content for a month or whatever it takes from, you know, initial pull of content to like final refinement and launch. So, you know, they keep a log of those kinds of changes. And because some of these courts already go to the web services team for some content support, that has been a relatively smooth process, but an important process, right? Because the courts have daily content updates for things like pending rulings or things like that, where even if there's not a lot of news produced, there are new documents that are added to the courts almost daily. So that's one thing. In terms of the timing of that, you know, from the initial, the best case scenario is you've got a very motivated court who is willing to, you know, cede a lot of the decision making to the Central Web Services team and saying, you know, we trust that you guys will put together the content in a way that we like and that is sort of reflective of what we need. From the time of scraping that content, putting it into the new site, starting to restructure it, right? So the content comes in fairly well structured, at least with headings and the appropriate HTML, but to put those together into the new pages, get that reviewed by the court, maybe make some changes. I think our best case scenario is you can do that in about a month's time. In a longer case where it's just a bigger court or there's less resources on the individual court site to review, they just take longer, it can take longer. But you know, we can get through from very beginning to a launch site in about 4 weeks. And we've done that actually, you know, rolling 2-3 sites at the same time.
Right. I mean, that's how we make velocity is we're doing them 2 or 3 at a time.
Yeah,
so there's a question in here.
It's just not one for a month. It's like there is a spreadsheet, I can assure you, that has like a sort of ziggurat frame that says this is how many sites are kind of coming through the pipeline from conceptual to launch. So go, John, you may have some more questions there.
Yeah, I got one from Jorgen that says, are court administrators allowed to make configuration changes, adding fields to content types? No, because obviously that would be a major problem. Now, it's not a hard no, because they could just say, you know what, I'm going and I'm going to maintain, I'm going to go maintain my website on my own, and I'm not even going to be part of this platform. And in that case, they would be able to do that. But on our platform, that is not possible because of the deployment process. Fields need to be added in from the web services side and pushed up through the system. I got another one here that says, so, and George, just to sort of talk about that a little bit more, that's where we were talking about some of these features and constraints. Like, what is the appropriate field structure for all 50 sites? What are the things that we can agree upon? These courts want this court wants that. So it's less of letting them just go and do it, and more of it coming into web services and a discussion occurring as to the best way to deploy it across the platform. And that's how that was done to reduce overall long-term maintenance of this platform. I see one up here. It says, Drupal for Gov asked, what was your process for going through the older content and document? Did you attempt to clean up the content before porting it into Drupal? Just a little bit. Not that much. Like Mike just stated, a lot of that work is done on the front end, somewhat manually, just because it has to be accurate. It's got to be done correctly. And the way that this old content was structured just wasn't possible in some of these cases. So I'm just going to talk fast here because I want to get to these rest of these questions here. It says, does the Drupal side connect with the courts? No. This is something that we want to do, and the question is about, does Drupal connect via API to the course's case file management systems for documentations, orders, and appearances? The reason why is because there's probably a dozen different systems being used right now across the court spectrum. There's probably 20 different jury systems, 15 different courts parking, So I'm like, hey guys, just pick one. It's a big deal, but it is a big deal. That's not an easy decision for them to make, and I respect that. And I think that they would, long-term vision-wise, love to see that, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if that's as easy as it sounds, due to the nature of politics in California. So no, not right now.
Sorry, one addendum to that, John, is that specifically for the case management system within the courts of appeal and the Supreme Court, there is a project right now to pick a new solution. And I think the long-term vision is to integrate that document management system with the new courts of appeal and Supreme Court sites. So opinions, pending issues, weekly case summaries, those kinds of things that are sort of very typical of the appeals court process. The situation with the lower courts, with the superior courts, is much more federated, obviously, because of all those different kinds of third-party jury systems, payment portals, etc.
Yeah, it's trying to find standardization within a federated environment. And so that is a unique people, personality, and political challenge that's exciting to work with. And sort of the last question I have here is, how are assets managed? Their assets are primarily managed on an individual basis within the site. Now, I do know that some court forms, like the official form repository, lives in one specific website, and all the other websites feed off that website so that they all get the same forms. But overall, assets are managed individually. They do not have an asset management system of any kind. Now, they may add one, but currently that's not the way it's done there.
And John, we are working, just so folks know, on 2-week sprints. So as new features are vetted, and some don't require a lot of vetting. They're just sort of feature requests that come from the primary business analysts and content editors that work for the central office, and they may be just small things that the courts don't need to be involved in. The bigger questions on, we want to integrate with this particular chat service, that because this local court uses a chat feature and these other courts use a different one. Those are things where we have to go through a process of talking to the multiple courts to get a solution. But a lot of these are just either small bug fixes or some styling updates that we do from time to time. Those are all within this sort of 2-week sprint cycle that we plan out, and we use Jira for that.
Yeah. I'm going to post a couple of other small things in the chat that not necessarily entirely about this particular conversation, but it is relevant as for some technology stuff and most relevant for rethinking about the multi-site solution. And so, you know, I'm not sure how many engineers are on board, but for the engineers that are on board, Chapter 3 believes that the Twig templating system is awesome, but that the Next.js templating system is awesome times 10. And so we've created Next Drupal, which is a way for you to decouple your Drupal website from Twig and use Next.js and Vercel and all of the advances and advancements in that type of platform for your site. Now, the most exciting thing is the multi-site capability of this, and I have a blog post up there that says rethink multi-site, please, is very, very cool. I could host 20 government sites in one Drupal site and serve them up to 20 different Next.js front ends and create my editorial experience within that Drupal stack pretty darn easily, right? So it's just something to think about as we end this discussion, that as we are moving forward in the web world of technology and things like that, that there are new and innovative processes and ways that are coming out to solve some of these problems that we've all individually and as companies been sort of working on for many, many years. And so I encourage you to read the Chapter 3 blog posts on this and take a look at Next Drupal for project work where you have to do crazy migrations and crazy stuff, and the front end is something that is difficult to work with. So I encourage that. And I think we're coming up to kind of the end here.
Yeah. Nika, do you want to give a wrap up or see if there's any other questions?
I think we are at the end. So thank you.
We are at the end, Mike.
All right.
with three
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out to John if you have any questions, and we're happy to share any other thoughts or documentation in follow-up that you'd like. But certainly we'll make all this available to you. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be at DrupalCon, so see you guys up in Portland.
All right, and thank you everybody for attending, and see you next month.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.